All right, copy number 2 coming up. Now, leave more room behind the eye than you think you need. At least an eye and a half, if not 2.
Then you're not coming out like
Do what? All right, so I am starting, again, I've got about an eye and a half. Yeah. Make sure you leave plenty of space here. Maybe even a little bit more than that. Yep, you can always put a little more dubbing in the front. That's exactly right. So. All right. I'm going to strip my feather. Let me zoom out just a little bit. Cut all that junk off the base. Okay. Concave side away from the hook shank. Be sure to leave a little bit of, I'm not in focus here. Hang on. Be sure to leave a little bit of that stem in front of your thread. See, make sure you've left plenty of room between that feather stem and your eye. All right, once we have that feather tied in, let's make a thread base back to the barb and then come back to the point. Now for our tail, remember, we're just reaching over to that other side. Now if you want a longer tail, yeah, feel free to use a separate feather to pull your tail from. But I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. And tie it in with those butts just above the point. And see, I'm holding that tail towards me a little bit to keep it on top. Well, I've got a thin shafted feather there. It's
that tail. Well, are you trying to get it together, put that tail on it?
well, it might be easier to just take a bigger feather too, like one this size, and peel your tail off of it if you don't want to. That's just the method he used.
Oh, yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I mean, because it's just right there. Yeah, just all right there. All right, so again, now it's dubbing loop time. All right, I'm going to back out here a little bit. Let me get them focused just a second. There we go. All right. Now again, we want to build about a 3-inch, fairly slim dubbing loop. I'm not using wax this time. I'm just going right on my thread with that rabbit dubbing.
Do you have an extra feather?
Extra what?
Feather?
Yep, I do. For a tail? Yeah, just get you a big one off the end of that.
My tail feather is ruffled.
And you want to make this dubbing noodle thinner than you think you should. Now, I didn't do it on the last fly I tied, but before I fished that, I would take like a gun cleaning brush and pick out that dubbing a little bit, make it a little buggier. I'll do that on this one.
What caliber?
30 actually is what I'm using. Yeah. All right. Yeah, 30 caliber works good. 25, 22. 50 caliber or shotgun might be good for streamers. So I have my dubbing brush here is a good 3 inches long. Again, you don't want to run out of dubbing. And remember to make the brush, put your finger on the thread, on top of the thread is the easiest. Let me zoom out a little bit more here. Put your finger on top of the thread, bring the thread over the top of the hook, and then bring your bobbin around once just to close that loop and secure it right there. So I've got my finger in the loop. And I can let go of that loop. After I make a couple of wraps of thread, I can just let go of it. And then just open spiral your thread to behind the hook eye, in front of your feather. Just like that. So I've got this loose dubbing loop hanging here, and I've got my thread hanging behind the eye of my hook. Yeah, and I didn't let go of that loop until after I'd wrapped my thread forward a little bit.
In other words, you're going behind it, so they can put it from the back and then go over to the other side and wrap the loop on.
All right, now I'm going to take my little electronic test clip and I'm going to spin it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm going to spin that 13 times. Okay. And then start wrapping.
You can't use the excuse of.
Now remember, I'm wrapping that bare thread back toward the rear so I get right in front of the tail. And start wrapping that dubbing right in front of the tail. I'm going to pick this one out because it's a pretty slim body, and that's really not what Flymphs are supposed to be. But we're going to pick it out, and I'll show you what it'll look like. So now I'm right at my feather, my hackle, so I'll hold it back and take one turn in front of it. And then take a couple of turns of my thread to tie that off.
You make 2 turns in front of the feather or one?
One. You can make 2. If you left a little too much space behind the eye, you can fill it in with 2 turns if you like. But if it's just about right, 1 turn should be just fine. And then I'm going to trim that excess off. Now I'm going to take my 30 caliber custom dubbing picker. And I want to bug this up a little bit. Okay, that looks a little more like a Flymph should look. Right, everybody with me, or I need to pause a little bit? We're good?
If you're left-handed, why you got the right hand?
Okay.
Put your right hand, put this right. There we go. Now, go up. Now, there you go. Now, go right there like that. And you gotta go up, drop it down, come over.
Robert, this time last year on the Little Mo, I tied an A&W looking like, but I used a dirty yellow dubbing on it. And man, they just ate it up. A dirty yellow colored. It was actually camel dubbing, some old Orvis camel I had. It was kind of a dirty yellow color, and man, they just, like, late that evening, they just ate it up. It was the same profile as an A&W, tied like an A&W, but I tied it with yellow dubbing instead of the March Brown and cream. I just used one dirty yellow on it. No. All yellow. Yep. All right, now let's wrap our hackle again. Before I wrap my hackle, I'm gonna give a few thread wraps just to bind down some of that dubbing that's up there. That's just the way he did it. That loop apparently makes it a lot more durable because the thread's running through the dubbing. Yeah. Well, I mean, he did it. He did this. Actually, he made his dubbing loops before he tied the fly. He used something called a Clark dubbing block. It's basically a piece of board with pegs in it, and he made those loops beforehand and then tied those in. And that may be why he used a loop anyway, just so he could make them beforehand. All right, so let's take your hackle pliers and then let's just sweep those fibers back as we make each turn. And I'm wrapping forward toward the eye of the hook. And I'm going to make an extra turn this time. Some of Hitty's, you look at pictures of some of his flies, they're really, really thickly hackled, and some of them are sparse. And I'll tie that off. Just a couple of loops of thread. And trim that off. And it's okay that I've trapped that fiber forward. That's A-okay. We're going to pull that back, and that'll be under our thread head. Okay. So now I have my hackle. I'll pull it all back. And build that kind of medium-sized thread head. And this is the first number 10 I've tied. I think if I were tying 10s, I'd probably use 140 denier instead of this 70, just to make this thread head a little bit faster to build. So I made this one a little more densely hackled than the last one. Little whip finish. And one thing you may notice about that we're using some fairly long hackle fibers here instead of, like, normally we use some that are like a hook gap in length, and these are much longer than that because when this is in the water, you want those hackle fibers to lay back and really kind of form a body almost back to the bend of the hook like that. So as you're pulling that through the water, yeah, they'll flare out and go back, but they'll also lay back against it and give it kind of a profile, a nice profile in the water.